unanswered question. It's not known right now. I cannot do a Google search on that, right? Or take any trend and ask, how long will that trend be around? That will be an unanswered question because we can predict for the future, but we don't know for sure. So how long will the strip malls in my area have all of these ballet fitness classes? That would be an unanswered question. Yes. But like questions you already know, the teacher already knows the answer to. Right. But you want to let them know, no, these are the questions that have not been. Yeah, you're really pushing forward for students to see that there are questions that are still not answered, right? So we don't often start with this iconic prompt with our kids when we're studying a topic, because you have to know a whole lot about a topic to know what's not known in the topic. In fact, this is a great place to end a conversation formally in your class by saying, so we've learned a lot about the solar system. What questions do you think are still not known? And let's go and see if they're still not known. Let's do a Google search. So you're hypothesizing these, for example. All right, I'm not going to jump too far into how to use it in the class yet because we're still kind of trudging through, but you will see some examples coming up. The next prompt is called Big Ideas. And big ideas are overarching statements or generalizations that connect a lot of different disparate concepts and facts together. And I will say big ideas in this case are a complete sentence. You need a verb. So the idea of power is not a big idea, but power could be constructive or destructive is. Because when you put that verb into your big idea, you now have a claim that's provable or disprovable. So prove that power, it can be used or abused. You can't just say prove power. You could say prove power exists, then you have a verb again, power exists. So it needs that verb in order to make it a claim that's provable or disprovable. And again, it's kind of highly generalizable. So there's two types of big ideas. I could spend a whole day on big ideas. I'm not going to. I'm just going to mention that there are big ideas that are rooted in particular fields or disciplines. That is, they're the big ideas of those fields. And then there are also big ideas that are universal, that span across lots of different fields. In IB, you call that transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary big ideas. So some examples in ballet. Ballet is the foundation of many types of dance. That's really rooted in ballet, but it's still a highly generalizable statement, right? I can show you lots of pieces of evidence that prove that. All right, versus a universal big idea like systems follow rules. We could study that in science, social science, math. I could study it in ballet. I could show you how it's a system and it follows rules. So there's the two types, and I'll give you a moment to kind of think of either one or the other, but make sure you note there's two types, two major types here. By the way, you can Google big ideas in ballet, and you'll come up with a nice little list in most topical areas, right? Okay, we have 3 more prompts. We're almost there. We're going to look first at changes over time. And remember, I mentioned time before when we looked at trends, right? So changes over time. How has time impacted something, right? What's the difference between the past and the present and the future, or all 3? So I could say that every trend is an example of a change over time with good certainty because I know that I have to have time in order to look at a trend. So every trend is a change over time. But not all changes over time represent a huge trend. Not all changes over time represent a trend. So what do I mean by that? Let me show you some examples of some trends, right? A trend as a change over time would be toward neoclassical and contemporary styles of dance. That's a trend. The whole field is moving that way. It's this big thing. An example of a little bit more narrow of a change over time is at one point in time, when the point shoe was created, it had a heel. If you've seen point shoes today, they don't have heels. So there was a change, right? We don't have heels anymore. It's not like this super long drawn out trend. It just happened. So it's a more of a simple change over time. Now, if I zoom into the time period where people are using the old kind and the new kind, and we're seeing like a progression, then that would be a trend. But if we're looking kind of broad spectrum, that's just a change over time. Another example that's very tangible of a non-trend change over time would be if you measure the temperature of a body before you have the ballet class, and then after you have the ballet class, there's a change over time, but you're not talking about a big trend, right? A big span of time. It's just like, what are the changes over time in the body? All right, temperature in that case. All right, so what I want you to do now, since you've already thought about trends, I'm going to give you a challenge. Try to zoom in really carefully, really specifically, and think of a change over time that's not a trend. Think of one piece. If you were doing scrapbooking, you could even talk about how when you turn over the page and you add pictures, that's a change over time. You're filling up your scrapbook. I mean, it can be very simplistic. You'll notice my cooking example as well, right? We see tons of trends like movement toward organics and locally sourced food options. Those are big trends. Changes over time might be when I'm making a roux, it thickens. It's changing over time. Or when I put in the batter in the oven, it thickens, right? Yeah. It changes consistency, change over time. Not really a big trend.
So could it be like for one of the a student and an unfinished product, and then at the end, the whole within a period of hours, or maybe one day to the next?
Yeah.
So, like
yes, so you can actually look at and have students draw their attention to how their products change over time. Yeah, you could do that, absolutely. So it's not so much that students have to really understand the distinction between these, but you, as you're designing your curriculum, would probably want to take some time to think about, are we looking at and examining a larger trend, or are we talking about something a little bit more smaller scale and looking at a change over time? For example, the life cycle of a butterfly. Well, you could see lots of changes over time. We're not talking about the trend of butterfly migration, right? So you would know that based on your content. Okay. The next one is multiple perspectives. So this is different points of view. How do different people see the same thing? And in ballet, I could talk about different choreographers' perspective. I could talk about the male and the female dancers' perspective. I could talk about different cultural perspectives. I could talk about the difference between the audience and the core and the principal dancers. All of them, the artistic director, they all have different perspectives. There'll be an overlap, but you look at something a little differently. I go to a restaurant with my sister-in-law who went to culinary school. We have a different experience. I'm like, wow, this dish is amazing. She's like, I think we might have done this a little bit differently. She has a different perspective because she has a different knowledge base and experience base. So I'll give you a second to jot down one or two perspectives. The last one, we have made it, right? The last one is across disciplines or interdisciplinarity. So now you're looking at how does what you're examining relate to other subject areas or other fields of study. So ballet has some really obvious connections. Kinesiology, biology, physics, think of the terms, music, history. There's so many different fields of study that are relevant and related to ballet. And you can talk about or think about one specific thing in ballet, or I can think about the field generally. So I'll give you a second. So you might be getting antsy now. Like, okay, I've got it. I'm ready to move on. How do we make this look in the classroom? Before we get there, I'm going to point out one more thing. And that is these are called the prompts of depth and complexity, and they're actually divided into two different groups. The prompts of depth are those that really help you understand in a very sophisticated way the intricacies of a topical area. So it's going deep. And there are 8 of those. And then in terms of complexity, We're looking at the interconnections across something. So across perspective, across time, across disciplines. They have more of a horizontal feeling or essence. So the prompts of depth are the first 8 that we talked about, going really deep and understanding the intricacies. And the prompts of complexity are the last 3. You're looking across for connections. When I was teaching in the classroom, I didn't talk about this with students, but I want you to know about it just so that you can, conceptually understand how these are and where they came from. But it might be really neat to start looking at the connection and showing students how they're different groups. So how does this relate in the classroom? You take any topical area you study, and I'm going to start with something like ecosystems. Is there a language of ecosystems? Oh my gosh, so many terms, right? Are there significant details, things that define and distinguish one thing from another? Yes. Are there patterns? Are there rules? Are there trends? Yes. Are there ethics? Ecosystems? Oh my gosh, absolutely. Big ideas, unanswered questions, changes over time, multiple perspectives. I'm being redundant on purpose. Across disciplines, can we connect it to different fields, ecosystems? Yes, the answer is yes, because that's what's so great about this strategy. These concepts are interdisciplinary. You can use any topic area that you study. I teach writing arguments. Is there a language that we use to talk about writing arguments when we write arguments? Yes. Are there key details? Do students know how to use the right details when writing arguments? Are there patterns in argument writing? Yes. Are there rules? Yes. Are there trends? Well, that's an interesting one. Let's look at how arguments were constructed long ago and how they're constructed today. That shows that we're moving beyond the grade level standards. We're adding something else in that's more sophisticated for our students. Now, do you have to take everything you teach and teach every one of the prompts? The answer is absolutely not. You would use the ones that you think are most relevant to the content and most relevant to the needs, interests, and abilities of your kids, right? So I don't want you to feel like, oh my gosh, this is too much. In every lesson, I have to have all these concepts. No, you just choose 1 or 2 that you think are really important and interesting. I can take a story like Charlotte's Web, and we could describe it from the language of a literary critic. Also, Charlotte's Web takes place on the farm. So we could think about all the terms that are part of the language of living on the farm or agriculturalism, something like that. Are there key details? Yes, details just describe everything from the characters to the figurative language that's used. Are there patterns? Yes. Rules? Yes. Trends, etc. All right, I won't go through it all. All right, the community. Again, social studies. All of these things are there. I want to pause on multiplication for just a second. Is there language for multiplication? Yes. Are there details? Are there patterns? Oh my gosh, tons. Are there rules? Yes. And would you not say that these are really foundational? Like everyone has to learn this when they learn multiplication conceptually, right? So these are really important. We get to trends. Now I'm going to tell you something. For me, I am not a mathematician, so I could not talk to you about the trends related to multiplication. I could maybe look at trends and try to relate it to multiplication, but that's going a little bit too far from where I think I want to go with students. I might have some other more interesting prompts of depth and complexity to use there, and that's okay. But if I asked a mathematician, like I'm thinking brilliant mathematician, so what are trends in your field? They would know related to mathematics. Whoops, I don't know why that happened. So it really shows you that it's kind of the level, the depth of understanding that someone has in a subject area or field. Okay, so I get the question, I love this strategy, where do I start? My kids don't know anything about it. They're in 7th grade. I'm too overwhelmed. I don't know where to start. So I'm going to give you some tips to introduce the prompts of depth and complexity to kids. Now, I call them prompts, not icons again. I mentioned that. So for me, it's really important to talk about well, what is a prompt? She's using prompt. I have no idea what that means. So I like to point out pictures or images or things that they understand that are related to prompts, like signs are prompts, and Post-it notes. I'm the Post-it note queen, so I've got prompts everywhere. Bolded text, sidebar clues are things that they've seen. A teleprompter, my navigation system, a coach. These are all prompters. What do prompters help us do?